Supreme Counselor, Kist Prime's crystalline form shimmered with discordant patterns as the emergency alerts cascaded through the Galactic Council's central spire. The usually pristine chamber, with its geometric perfection and carefully maintained harmonic resonance, descended into chaos as more council members materialized through the quantum gates. "Impossible," hummed Elder Vest Rhythm, their normally smooth facets rippling with interference patterns. The humans wouldn't dare approach Axiom Prime. Not after the diplomatic incident. But the holographic display hovering in the chamber's center told a different story. 37 ships of human design moved through space in what could only be described as a dance, their formation shifting and flowing like waves on an ocean, a concept that made most council members vibrate with discomfort. "They're broadcasting something," announced Monitor Extal Pulse, their crystalline structure flickering rapidly between purple and blue states of agitation. "Playing it now." The chamber filled with sound, rich, complex waves of harmony and rhythm that sent shivers through the crystalline architecture. Several junior council members immediately switched to emergency frequency states, their structures humming with defensive resonance. "By the first crystal," whispered Kest Prime, watching as the sound waves began creating sympathetic vibrations in the chamber walls. "What kind of weapon is this?" The music, for that's what it was, swelled to a crescendo. The human ships continued their approach, their formation changing to match the rhythm of the broadcast. The Council's defensive AI sparked and sputtered, trying to categorize this unprecedented approach vector. Analysis suggests this is something called Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, reported Monitor Extal Pulse, their voice wavering between octaves. The humans are broadcasting it on all frequencies, along with speak, Monitor, along with an invitation to what they call a concert. The chamber erupted in harmonic discord. Concert. The word itself sent ripples of confusion through the assembled council. Their species had evolved beyond the need for such primitive displays of emotional resonance. They were beings of pure logic, their crystalline forms the perfect expression of mathematical precision. The defensive grid reports similar broadcasts from all approaching vessels, continued Extal Pulse. The flagship, designated U.S. Harmony, appears to be coordinating the transmission. Their captain, identified as Michael Anderson, requests permission to continue, Monitor, commanded Kest Prime, their structure vibrating with what they would never admit was fear. To share the universal language of music with our world. Elder Vest Rhythm's form briefly destabilized, their usually perfect geometric patterns dissolving into chaos before realigning. This must be retaliation for our response to their ambassador's chemical attack. They mean to destabilize our entire civilization with these emotional resonances. Kest Prime studied the holographic display as the human fleet continued its inexorable approach. Their formation now resembled what the Council's database identified as a treble clef, another concept that sent uncomfortable vibrations through their crystalline matrix. "Deploy the harmonic dampeners," ordered Kest Prime. "We cannot allow these frequencies to reach our population centers. The psychological damage could be catastrophic." But even as they gave the order, Kest Prime noticed something disturbing. The younger council members, particularly those who had never experienced direct contact with humans, were beginning to resonate with the music. Their crystalline forms shifted and swayed, creating harmonies that hadn't been heard in their chambers for millennia. "Supreme Counselor," called out a young member, their voice carrying an unusual harmonic undertone. "What if this isn't an attack? The frequencies, they feel right." Silence. Kest Prime's form pulsed with authority. "We are beings of logic and order. We do not feel." But even as they spoke, they noticed their own structure beginning to vibrate in response to a particularly moving passage of the symphony. As the human fleet drew closer, their music growing stronger, Kest Prime made a decision that would change their civilization forever. Send out the alert to all crystal cities. Defend our homeworld from human invasion. But even they couldn't help noticing that the alert, when broadcast, emerged as something unprecedented, a perfect harmony with the approaching human symphony. 3 solar cycles earlier, Ambassador Jessica Morgan stood at the base of the crystal spire, her neck craned skyward as the alien sun scattered rainbow refractions through the transparent city above. The diplomatic mission had spent months preparing for this moment, studying the crystalline species' customs, practicing the precise frequencies of formal greetings, and memorizing the exact geometric patterns required for respectful interaction. None of that training had prepared her for the sheer beauty of Axiom Prime. Ambassador Morgan hummed her crystalline guide, Telxt sequence, their form shifting through perfect geometric patterns. You appear to be experiencing structural instability. Shall I summon a medical resonator? No, Jessica whispered, her voice catching. I'm just overwhelmed. Your city is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Telxt sequence's pattern shifted to what Jessica recognized as confusion. Beauty is an emotional construct. We simply build according to optimal mathematical principles. The first tear rolled down Jessica's cheek, catching the alien sunlight and splitting it into pristine spectra. Telxt sequence's entire crystalline form suddenly froze mid-pattern. Ambassador, they broadcast on all emergency frequencies, their usual melodic tones sharp with alarm. You are leaking corrosive substances. Jessica laughed through her tears, which only made things worse. More droplets fell, and Telxt sequence's form began strobing between emergency patterns. These are tears of joy, she tried to explain, wiping her eyes. It's a natural human response to overwhelming positive emotions. The words natural and emotions in the same sentence sent ripples of distress through the gathering crowd of crystalline observers. Their forms began resonating at frequencies that made the very air shimmer with anxiety. Containment team to the diplomatic sector. Telxt sequence's broadcast reached a pitch that shattered 3 decorative crystal formations. The human ambassador is deploying unknown biological agents. Wait, Jessica held up her hands, still sniffling and laughing at the absurdity of the situation. This is just an expression of appreciation for your culture. The containment team materialized through quantum gates, their forms already configured into a quarantine formation. They projected a sterile field around Jessica and her human entourage, their crystalline surfaces reflecting her tear-streaked face back at her from dozens of angles. The human diplomatic representative has violated Section 47X of the Non-Biological Warfare Treaty, announced Security Chief Coat Edge, their form sharp and aggressive. All foreign bodies must be immediately removed from Axiom Prime to prevent further contamination. Contamination. Jessica's scientific advisor, Dr. James Reynolds, stepped forward within the containment field. They're just tears, salt water, and proteins, completely harmless. It has admitted to deploying proteins. Coat Edge's form pulsed with red warning frequencies. Protein chains are capable of infinite molecular combinations. The risk is unacceptable. Jessica watched in horror as her months of careful diplomatic preparation dissolved like salt in water, an analogy that would probably send the Council into another panic if she voiced it. The containment field began moving their entire team toward the quantum gates. Please, she made one last attempt, her voice steady despite her damp cheeks. Where we come from, crying can be a sign of connection, of being moved by something greater than ourselves. I cried because your world touched my heart. It claims its leakage has affected its cardiac systems. Telxt sequence's alarmed harmonics set off resonance warnings throughout the nearby crystal structures. Full evacuation protocols are now in effect. As the human diplomatic team was hustled through the quantum gates, Jessica caught one last glimpse of the crystal spires. To her amazement, the surfaces that her tears had fallen upon were changing, reflecting light in new and complex patterns. Several younger crystalline beings were studying these patterns with what appeared to be fascination before being hurried away by security forces. Her last thought, before the quantum transmission swept them back to their ship, was that she had never imagined being moved to tears could cause an interplanetary incident. She also couldn't shake the feeling that those new patterns in the crystal might mean something important. If only anyone had stayed long enough to study them. Captain Michael Anderson stood on the bridge of the U.S. Harmony, watching as his fleet maintained its carefully choreographed formation. The 37 ships moved in perfect synchronization, their positions plotted not by military strategy but by the mathematical principles of acoustic resonance. "Status of the broadcast?" he asked, hiding a smile as his communications officer adjusted the playlist. Lieutenant Sarah Roberts grinned from her station. "Currently transmitting Mozart's Queen of the Night area, sir. The Crystalline Council's responses are interesting." On the main view screen, crystal formations across Axiom Prime's surface flickered with chaotic light patterns. The planet's automated defense systems seemed equally confused, their scanning beams moving in increasingly erratic patterns that almost matched the music's rhythm. "Their AI is having a breakdown," reported Commander David Chen from Tactical. "It's generating hundreds of threat assessments per second, each more bizarre than the last. The latest one suggests we might be attempting to teach their planet to dance." Anderson chuckled. "Well, they're not entirely wrong." The bridge crew watched as another crystalline defense platform tried to analyze Metallica's "Nothing Else Matters," the next track in their carefully curated playlist. The platform's crystals began pulsing in time with the guitar riffs before its systems temporarily shut down. "Sir," Lieutenant Roberts called out, her voice mixing concern with amusement, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the surface. Their strategic analysis crystal wants to know if our ship's formation is meant to represent something called a mosh pit." "Tell them it's actually a concert hall configuration," Anderson replied, and switched to Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. "Let's see how their architecture handles pipe organ music." The effect was immediate and spectacular. Across Axiom Prime's surface, the crystal spires began resonating with the powerful bass notes. Several of the younger crystal beings, visible through the ship's high-resolution scanners, started vibrating in harmony before being hurriedly contained by security forces. "Captain," Commander Chen's voice carried a note of warning. "The Council is activating their harmonic dampeners. They're trying to block our music from reaching the surface." Anderson leaned forward in his command chair. "Interesting. Lieutenant Roberts, what happened to those crystal formations that Ambassador Morgan's tears fell on 3 months ago?" Roberts quickly accessed the data. "According to our scans, those areas are resistant to the dampening fields. They're still resonating with our music, sir. And the pattern is spreading." "Just as we thought," Anderson nodded. "Those tears didn't just create new patterns, they awakened something." Dr. Reynolds' theory was right. Their entire civilization is one giant instrument. They'd just forgotten how to play it. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. Their mission wasn't just about making amends for a diplomatic incident. It was about awakening an entire species to a part of themselves they'd forgotten. "Sir," Robert straightened suddenly at her console, "we're being hailed by a junior council member. They're broadcasting on a frequency that, sir, it's perfectly matched to Middle C." "On screen," Anderson ordered, straightening his uniform. The crystal being that appeared was younger than most council members, their form shifting through patterns that seemed almost musical. "Human vessel," they chimed, their tones carrying an unusual harmony. "I am Dawn Chime 3rd Resonance. The council has ordered me to demand your withdrawal. But, Anderson prompted gently. "But I must know, what is this sensation your music creates? These vibrations that feel like emotions," Anderson suggested. The crystal being's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "Such things are forbidden." And yet, their surface caught the light in a way that created a rainbow cascade, eerily similar to falling tears. "And yet I find myself wanting to resonate with these patterns. To feel." Anderson shared a knowing look with his crew. This was the moment they'd been waiting for, the first crack in the crystal facade of logic. "Dawn Chime 3rd Resonance," he said carefully. Would you like us to teach you about something humans call a symphony? Lieutenant Amanda Hayes sat in the U.S. Harmony's communication hub, surrounded by holographic displays showing the crystalline city's ever-changing patterns. Her fingers danced across the console as she adjusted frequencies, watching how different musical notes affected the alien architecture. "There's something we're missing," she muttered, pushing a strand of brown hair behind her ear. "The patterns aren't random. They're responding, but not just to the music." A soft chime interrupted her thoughts. A private transmission from the surface, specifically from the young council member who had contacted them earlier. Dawn chime third resonance's crystalline form shimmered on her personal display. Lieutenant Hayes, the young crystal being harmonized, their form shifting through subtle patterns. "I have been assigned to study your transmissions for potential threats, but I find myself distracted." Amanda smiled. "By the music. By the way it makes me resonate." Dawn chime's surface rippled with what might have been embarrassment. "When your ships broadcast the piece you call Moonlight Sonata, my external facets began generating harmonics without conscious control. The council calls this a malfunction, but it felt right," Amanda finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. She pulled up the architectural scans of the oldest crystal structures. Dawn chime, "Your cities, were they always perfectly geometric?" The crystal being's form flickered with surprise. "The ancient structures show some irregular patterns, but those are considered flaws from a less evolved time." Amanda's fingers flew across her console, overlaying the musical patterns from Earth's earliest known songs with the ancient crystal structures' designs. The correlation made her breath catch. "They're not flaws," she whispered. "They're sheet music." Dawn chime's form pulsed with confusion. "Explain." "Your ancestors didn't build cities," Amanda said, her voice growing excited. "They built instruments. Look at these patterns. They're not random imperfections. They're designed to resonate at specific frequencies. Your entire civilization is one massive symphony that's been silenced by logic." The young crystal being studied the data, their form vibrating with increasing intensity. "But why would our ancestors build in such an inefficient manner?" "Because music isn't about efficiency," Amanda explained, pulling up videos of Earth's greatest concert halls. "It's about connection, emotion, the sharing of experience through sound. These old structures weren't just buildings, they were meant to sing." As if to prove her point, the U.S. Harmony's current broadcast, Debussy's Clair de Lune, sent ripples through the crystal cities. The ancient sections responded with harmonics that hadn't been heard for millennia. "The council must be informed," Dawn chime decided. "They're usually melodic tones urgent, but they will not accept such an illogical conclusion without proof." Amanda's eyes sparkled with an idea. "Then we don't tell them. We show them." She accessed the ship's main computer. "Captain Anderson, I have a request that's going to sound a little crazy." Hours later, the U.S. Harmony's crew watched in amazement as their ship maneuvered into position above one of the oldest crystal structures. The other ships in the fleet moved to form a perfect acoustic amplification pattern. All frequencies synchronized, Amanda reported from her station. "Ready to begin the concert, Captain." Anderson nodded. "Proceed, Lieutenant. Let's wake up this city." The first notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony thundered from the fleet's combined broadcast array, precisely calibrated to match the ancient structure's resonant frequency. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a crystal glass singing under a perfect note, the entire city began to hum. Colors rippled through its ancient facets, creating patterns that looked remarkably like musical notes. The surrounding newer structures, built for pure logic and efficiency, stood silent, but the old city sang. Dawn chime's transmission showed their form practically dancing with excitement. "Lieutenant Hayes, my sensors indicate that several council members are approaching to investigate the disturbance. They cannot deny what their own structures are telling them." Amanda smiled as the music swelled. "Then let's give them a proper welcome. After all," she added with a grin, "we humans have a saying. If the mountain won't come to Muhammad. I don't understand that reference, Dawn Chime admitted. Don't worry, Amanda laughed. You'll learn all about human sayings soon enough. For now, just enjoy the music. Your city certainly is. Captain Michael Anderson stood in the ancient crystal amphitheater, now transformed into what might be the most extraordinary concert hall in the galaxy. Above him, the U.S. Harmony hovered in perfect position, its hull gleaming in the alien sunlight. But the real spectacle was about to begin. Are you certain about this, Captain? Dr. Eleanor Reed, Earth's foremost conductor, adjusted her formal black jacket nervously. We're about to use an alien city as an instrument. The scans Lieutenant Hayes discovered don't lie, Anderson replied, watching as crystalline beings filed into the surrounding structures. This entire amphitheater was designed for this exact purpose. We're not changing their civilization. We're helping them remember who they were. The conductor nodded, taking a deep breath as she raised her baton. Behind her, members of the Earth Symphony Orchestra unpacked their instruments, their movements washed with fascination by hundreds of shimmering crystal forms. The council is present, Dawn Chime announced, materializing beside them. Though they claim they're only here to monitor for structural damage. Eleanor smiled. Then let's give them something worth monitoring. She turned to her orchestra. Places, everyone. We'll begin with Holst's The Planets. Mars first. The crystal beings shifted in patterns that might have been anticipation or anxiety. Supreme Counselor, Kist Prime's form, pulsed with what they would never admit was curiosity. The first notes struck like thunder. The ancient amphitheater responded instantly. Each crystal panel, each carefully carved facet that had been dismissed as architectural flaws for generations, began to resonate. The music didn't just play, it became visible, rippling through the crystalline structures in waves of color and light. Impossible, hummed Elder Vestrhythm, their form vibrating in perfect harmony despite their protest. These patterns violate all logical architectural principles. No, Dawn Chime countered, their voice carrying a new confidence. They'd follow musical principles. Look. As the orchestra played, Lieutenant Hayes monitored the city's response from her position near the conductor. The harmonic patterns are spreading, she reported excitedly. The newer structures, they're beginning to resonate in sympathy with the ancient ones. The music swelled, and with it, the crystal city sang. Structures that had stood in rigid geometric perfection for centuries began to pulse with new life. The younger crystal beings, less bound by tradition, started to vibrate in harmony with the music, their forms creating impromptu light shows that danced with the orchestral rhythms. Eleanor, caught up in the moment, gestured to the crystal formations themselves, conducting them as if they were part of her orchestra. To everyone's amazement, they responded, adding their own harmonics to the earth music in ways that transformed both. Captain, Hayes called out, her voice filled with wonder. The crystal beings, they're not just resonating with the music, they're learning to make their own. She was right. Throughout the amphitheater, crystal beings had begun experimenting with their own harmonic frequencies, creating sounds that blended perfectly with the Earth Orchestra. What had begun as a performance was becoming a jam session between species. Kest Prime drifted forward, their usually rigid form flowing with unusual grace. This disruption of our architectural harmony is unprecedented, they announced. Then, to everyone's surprise, their form shifted to create a perfect resonance with the bass line. And yet, I find myself unable to deny its mathematical beauty. Anderson watched as more council members began to join in, their ancient instincts overriding millennia of logical conditioning. The music had awakened something in them that no amount of rational argument could have reached. It appears, Dawn Chime observed, their form glowing with joy, that we have been measuring our evolution by the wrong standards. We thought perfect geometry was the height of advancement. But perhaps, they paused as their structure created a harmony that perfectly complemented the violence. Perhaps the ability to create beauty is the true mark of civilization. Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, much like Ambassador Morgan's had months ago, continued to conduct. But now she was conducting both the Earth Orchestra and an alien city in the galaxy's first interspecies symphony. And this time, when the crystal beings saw her tears, they understood, because for the first time in their recorded history, they were crying too, in their own way, with light and sound, and pure, unreserved joy. Dawn Chime stood in the heart of the ancient archives, surrounded by crystalline data structures that pulsed with long-forgotten memories. Lieutenant Amanda Hayes watched through a holographic link as her friend's form shifted through patterns she'd never seen before. Amanda. Dawn Chime's voice carried an unusual tremor. I found something. Something that changes everything we thought we knew about our past. The young crystal being projected a series of images into the space between them. Ancient crystal structures appeared, but unlike anything currently standing on Action Prime. These buildings curved and flowed like frozen music, their surfaces etched with complex patterns that seemed to move even in the static recordings. Those are beautiful, Amanda breathed. But I don't understand. Why aren't there any structures like this now? Because a new voice harmonized as Supreme Counselor Kist Prime materialized in the archive chamber. We destroyed them. Both Dawn Chime and Amanda fell silent as Kist Prime's form rippled with what might have been regret. The Supreme Counselor approached the projected images, their usually perfect geometric patterns showing subtle distortions. When the logic revolution began, 3,000 cycles ago, we believed emotion was a weakness, Kist Prime continued. We saw our musical nature as primitive, something to be overcome. The ancient structures were redesigned, their resonant patterns suppressed. We became beings of pure reason, or so we thought. Dawn Chime's form pulsed with sudden understanding. The great restructuring wasn't about architectural efficiency at all, was it? It was about silencing the music. Indeed, Kist Prime's admission sent shockwaves through the archive's crystal walls. But we didn't just silence the buildings, we silenced ourselves. Amanda leaned closer to her holographic display. But why? What could have made an entire civilization reject such a fundamental part of itself? Kist Prime's form shifted to project another image, a devastating scene of crystal structures shattered by discordant resonances. Because music is powerful, Lieutenant Hayes. Our ancestors discovered they could use harmonics not just to create, but to destroy. The logic revolution began after the Resonance Wars, when entire cities were shattered by weaponized songs. So you chose silence over the risk of destruction, Amanda whispered. You turned to perfect geometry because it couldn't be used as a weapon. We thought we were evolving, Kist Prime hummed softly. Instead, we were hiding. And now your species has awakened what we fought so hard to suppress. But Dawn Chime's form had begun to pulse with an intense light. Supreme Counselor, look at these architectural patterns more closely. They're not just resonance chambers, they're dampeners. Our ancestors didn't just build weapons, they built safeguards. The very structures that could amplify destructive harmonics could also prevent them. The archive chamber filled with new light as Dawn Chime accessed more ancient records. The logic revolution didn't save us from our nature. It just buried our solutions along with our problems. We didn't need to choose between music and safety. We needed to learn balance. Kist Prime studied the evidence, their form gradually shifting from rigid geometry to more fluid patterns. Perhaps you are right. And perhaps it is no coincidence that the humans have come to us now, when we most need to remember this truth. Amanda watched as other crystal beings began materializing in the archive chamber, drawn by the unprecedented resonances emanating from their leaders. Young and old, conservative and progressive, they gathered to witness the awakening of their true heritage. Your music, Kist Prime addressed Amanda. It awakened something in us. Not just emotion, but memory. The humans didn't bring chaos to our world. They brought back our song. Dawn Chime moved to the center of the chamber, their form glowing with newfound purpose. Then let us not waste this second chance. Let us learn from humans how to embrace music without fear, how to feel without losing control, how to sing without shattering. The assembled crystal beings began to hum in harmony, their combined resonance causing the ancient archive to shine with colors unseen for millennia. It wasn't just the buildings awakening now. It was an entire civilization remembering how to dream. The conservative council members materialized in the central spire's chamber, their forms locked in rigid geometric patterns that seemed increasingly out of place among the flowing crystalline architecture. Elder Vistrhythm led the group, their structure vibrating with barely contained distress. "This must stop," they declared, projecting their harmonics across the chamber. "These emotional resonances are degrading the very foundation of our society. Look at what has become of our youth." Through the crystal walls, they could all see the changes sweeping through the city. Young crystal beings swayed and pulsed with newfound rhythms, their forms creating impromptu light shows that danced in time with human music. The once perfect grid of crystal towers had begun to curve and flow, responding to the songs that now filled the air. Ambassador Jessica Morgan, recently returned to Axiom Prime, watched from an observation platform with Dawn Chime and Lieutenant Amanda Hayes. "They're afraid," she observed, no longer bothering to hide her smile as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. This time, several crystal beings nearby resonated in harmony with her emotion instead of recoiling. "They fear what they don't understand," Dawn Chime agreed, their form shifting through a complex series of musical patterns. "But they cannot deny what's happening. Look." Below them, a group of crystal children had discovered they could create different tones by altering their structural frequencies. They were attempting to reproduce a human lullaby, their forms glowing with different colors as they hit each note. More remarkably, their efforts were causing nearby buildings to resonate in harmony, creating natural amphitheaters. Supreme Counselor, Elder Vistrhythm, turned to Kest Prime. "You must invoke the emergency harmony protocols. Return our cities to their proper geometric alignment." But Kest Prime's form had changed in recent days. The once rigid patterns now flowed with subtle rhythms, their edges softened by newfound understanding. "And what is proper, Elder? The truth in our archives shows that we were never meant to be purely logical beings. Our ancestors built music into our very structure. The humans have corrupted you," Vistrhythm accused, their form crackling with sharp, discordant frequencies. "No," Kest Prime's voice carried a new kind of authority. Not the cold geometry of logic, but the warm resonance of wisdom. They reminded us of who we are. "Look around you, Elder. Our cities aren't being destroyed. They're being reborn." As if to prove their point, a new sound filled the air. The crystal children had mastered their lullaby, but they'd done more than simply copy the human melody. They'd added their own harmonics, creating something entirely new. A blend of human emotion and crystal resonance that made the entire city shine. "It's happening everywhere," Amanda reported, checking her datapad. "All across the planet, crystal beings are discovering they can create music, and each new song seems to unlock more of the ancient architectural features. The buildings aren't just responding to the music anymore. They're part of it." Jessica watched as a particularly beautiful harmony caused a nearby tower to transform, its straight lines flowing into curves that amplified and enhanced the sound. "They're not just remembering how to make music," she realized. "They're remembering how to grow." Dawn Chime's form pulsed with excitement. The humans' music was just the beginning. Now we're creating our own songs, finding our own voice. Even those who resist, they gestured to where Elder Vistrhythm stood, unconsciously swaying to the crystal children's lullaby, cannot deny the call of their own nature forever. Kest Prime moved to the chamber center, their form casting rainbow refractions across the gathered crowd. "The time of pure logic is over," they announced. "But we need not fear this change. Our ancestors built safeguards into our very architecture, systems to prevent the destructive resonances we once feared. We can embrace emotion without losing control. We can sing without shattering." As if in response, the entire central spire began to hum, its crystal structures vibrating with centuries of suppressed music. The conservative council members watched in amazement as their own forms began to respond, ancient instincts awakening despite their resistance. "And so," Dawn Chime observed, their voice carrying both joy and wonder, "the invasion the council feared has indeed changed our world forever, not through force or fear, but through harmony and hope." One solar cycle later, the crystal spires of Axiom Prime bore little resemblance to their former rigid geometry. The cities had bloomed like geometric flowers, their structures flowing in endless patterns that caught starlight and transformed it into music. Below the transformed towers, crystal beings and humans gathered for an event that would mark a new chapter in both their histories. Ambassador Jessica Morgan stood on a platform that seemed to float in midair, suspended by harmonics rather than anti-gravity technology. Beside her, Dawn Chime's form shimmered with patterns that matched her formal diplomatic attire. "Hard to believe that just one cycle ago, you thought my tears were a weapon," Jessica remarked, watching crystal children practice their harmonics with human music students. "Harder still to believe we once thought emotion was a flaw," Dawn Chime responded, their form creating gentle chimes that made nearby crystals resonate in sympathy. "Look at what we've become." The grand amphitheater before them had been transformed into the galaxy's most extraordinary concert hall. Crystal formations spiraled overhead, each facet precisely tuned to enhance and transform sound. The U.S. Harmony hovered above, its hull gleaming as it prepared to join the performance. Captain Michael Anderson approached with Supreme Counselor Kest Prime, whose once rigid form now flowed like visual music. "The combined orchestra is ready," Anderson reported, "though I'm not sure orchestra quite covers what we've created here." "Indeed," Kest Prime agreed, their voice harmonizing naturally with the ambient sounds. "We have composed something that has never existed before, a true fusion of our forms of expression." The audience chamber filled as beings from across the galaxy arrived to witness the historic performance. The human musicians took their places, their instruments gleaming beneath the crystal lights. Among them, crystal beings positioned themselves, their forms tuned to specific frequencies that would complement the Earth instruments. Dr. Eleanor Reed stepped onto the conductor's platform, but she wasn't alone. Dawn Chime accompanied her, their form prepared to conduct the crystal chorus. Together, they would lead the first true interspecies symphony. "The piece we've created," Dawn Chime explained to the audience, "draws from both our traditions. The human elements celebrate emotion and storytelling, while our crystalline harmonics add dimensions of light and molecular resonance that create not just music, but a complete sensory transformation." Lieutenant Amanda Hayes, now the official cultural exchange coordinator, monitored the harmonic frequencies from her station. "All crystal structures are in tune," she reported. "The city is ready to sing." The performance began softly, a single violin note matched by a crystal's pure tone. Then more instruments joined, each paired with crystal harmonics that transformed the sound into something entirely new. The crystal city itself began to pulse with light and color, its structures becoming part of the orchestra. As the music swelled, the story of their peoples unfolded in sound and light. The fear and misunderstanding of their first contact transformed into curiosity, then understanding, and finally celebration. Crystal beings who had once rejected all emotion now swayed with the music, their forms creating spontaneous harmonies that enhanced the performance. Even Elder Vestrhythm, who had so strongly opposed the changes, contributed a deep resonant harmony that made the foundation crystals sing. Their former opposition had transformed into a determination to preserve their logical heritage, while embracing their rediscovered artistic nature. The symphony reached its crescendo as the U.S. Harmony added its voice. Not weapons or defensive systems, but pure sound transmitted through space. The ship's contribution completed the harmony between the organic and crystalline, the logical and emotional, the old and the new. As the final notes faded, Jessica felt tears rolling down her cheeks once again. But this time, the crystal beings around her didn't panic. Instead, their forms shifted to create patterns that mimicked falling drops, turning her tears into visual music that rippled through the amphitheater. We once feared human invasion would destroy our world, Hest Prime observed, their form radiating contentment. Instead, it helped us rebuild it into something far more beautiful than pure logic could ever achieve. Dawn Chime's form pulsed with joy as they added, and in doing so, we discovered that the most perfect geometry of all is found in the harmonies between different souls, different species, different ways of experiencing the universe. Above them, the crystal spires of Axiom Prime continued their endless dance of light and sound, no longer just buildings, but a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound invasions come not with weapons of war, but with songs of peace.